Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to a shocking surprise Win Daily Sports podcast. In what has been, they described the US Open qualifying day as the longest day in golf. This took on a whole new meaning today. Delighted to be joined by the one and only Sia Nejad from the Win Daily Sports team, who also happens to be an attorney. And Sia, what better man to discuss all the implications of this than someone with a legal background? Sia, how are you doing today? How are you coping?
I'm doing well. I mean, to me, I guess I internalize things like this a little different than most. I mean, I think it's kind of exciting. I know there's just so many sort of branches that can go in different directions that, people have an issue with. But I just think for the future of golf, it's not that I thought this was inevitable or anything, but this kind of makes sense to me, given what the state of LIV was and what the state of the PGA Tour may have been in the next few years, for example, with maybe other players leaving potentially. Can they sort of maintain the salary structure and the payout structure that they've had this particular year? I mean, there's just so many things to consider that we'll never know, because the PGA Tour and LIV never put themselves in the spot that they would have been in 2024, in 2025. But to summarize, it's Brian England in our chat who says, in capital letters, "Wow" is all I can say. It was a wow moment. I mean, no, don't get me wrong. It was definitely a wow moment. And we don't know all the implications from it. I mean, I'm certainly not on here from a legal standpoint to answer any of those questions, but I do think it's worth at least chatting about.
Definitely. I mean, look, it does raise so many questions. And as you said, we can't predict what the future is going to hold, but I certainly think that the vast majority of people did not predict that this was going to be the outcome. I know from my background, I used to live in the Middle East for 8 years, and Dubai and Saudi Arabia have a fierce rivalry, as all of them do. And it really becomes a bit of a pissing contest of, I'm going to have the biggest building, I'm going to have, the biggest shopping mall. And it really is that money kind of being thrown around in that way. And so with Dubai Ports sponsoring the DP World Tour and the close relationship between the DP World Tour and the PGA Tour, I really failed to see how Saudi Arabia was then going to enter that mix and form some sort of joint alliance that was actually going to resolve everything. And it felt that that was going to kind of happen. It would have been 2 years ago. And so for now to merge now, for me, was a complete and utter shock. But let's get into
David, but here's the thing. Here's why it shouldn't be a shock. And for the record, I was on the first cut last year, and I predicted that they would settle this one way or the other. And it was very easy for me to say that, in the sense that I didn't know what the structure of said settlement would be. And I still don't know what the structure is going to be necessarily, but it made sense from a couple different vantage points. One is, we can't forget what you just sort of implied and stated, David, that Saudi fund, $600 billion plus. I mean, I can't overstate that enough, how hard that is to fight against if you were the PGA Tour. That if you're the PGA Tour, you would have tried to put up a massive fight. You would have tried to get all the things out there, whether we deem it rhetoric now or whether we deemed it rhetoric then. The point is, you would have put up a fight, and it's possible that in the midst of that fight, you're saying to yourself, well, maybe it's just best for everybody that we join forces. And I know that's hard for people to hear, but $600 billion isn't just something that I say. Like, the idea that they were just going to go away when people were deeming this like the Robert Garrigus and like Phil Mickelson tour, and we were all having our little laugh. Like, it's not like the Saudis were going to take their checkbook and go home. Like, it was a silly notion that this thing was going to go away. But the other thing, David, that is so critical, and this is where, this is kind of an obvious point from an attorney standpoint, but maybe not obvious to those that are listening. The ensuing litigation, in my opinion, and I'm speculating 100%, but this type of litigation, this type of discovery that can unveil so many different things, not just from the PGA Tour end, but the LIV end, these two parties were so incentivized to meet in the middle somehow, some way, because I'm telling you, discovery is an ugly thing. It's not just the depositions that we sometimes see on TV with some of these famous actors and some dumb things they say over I don't mean actors. I mean like people that are in depositions, that some things they say over 2 or 3 day deposition, 8 hours a day. It's also the discovery of documents and correspondence. That stuff can be so damaging, not just to the tours themselves, but as it relates and as it pertains to antitrust issues that may not go away, but certainly are somewhat contained, because you don't have these two parties going back and forth against each other, particularly LIV, making those antitrust claims.
For sure. I mean, like how much do you put down to this becoming, trying to avoid some of those messy lawsuits and millions of dollars getting spent in legal fees and potentially damaging stories being released compared to actually what's best for the game of golf going forward? Because they're spinning it as this is what's best for the game of golf going forward. How much of it is that, and how much of it factors in, as you said, the damage that could have come?
It's such a good question. And I think people they're not ever going to appreciate how big the litigation part is, not just paying the attorneys. And for the record, the Saudis, it's kind of an unlimited fund. And that's actually something that's very daunting to the PGA Tour, who has plenty of funds themselves. But when you know that, you might be in litigation for 10, 15 years. I was in civil lawsuits. I was a defense attorney. I was in civil lawsuits that were just run of the mill, like negligent security, some defamation, some just typical car accident case, maybe a slip and fall. Some of those cases that I was in that were not big cases lasted 7 years. Lasted 8 years. Not all of them, but some of them. This case was going to last a very long time. It was going to be a PR nightmare, but potentially a legal nightmare too. And it just was not going to be a good look. So, David, to your point, we'll never know what would have been found and what the implications of these things would have been. But I'm just telling you, they know. We don't know, but they know, their attorneys know. And that's why they came to in my opinion, it's in large part why they came to an agreement on something that didn't seem like it was conceivably agreeable. And it's exactly what I said last year, that I just don't think anybody really appreciated it. But the fact is, I thought they'd settle because I know how these lawsuits go, and they're not fun for anybody. They're very damaging, potentially.
That's true. You did say that. And I remember us having those discussions on the Draftcast as well, of that somehow this would get tidied up. And I don't know if it's tidier now, but it certainly looks like it's moving towards some sort of resolution. Although in saying that, there's still no guarantee that this is 100% going to happen.
Sure.
Reports emerging that this players conference has not gone well, that it was about 90% negative, 10% for. Calls for Jay Monahan to resign were met with rousing applause throughout all of the players. I mean, from Jay Monahan's perspective, some of this for me seems like, how do you reconcile a relationship like Rory McIlroy? You've been trotting Rory McIlroy out every single week, getting him to defend your tour, really implicating his game as well, having a huge implication in terms of his performance on the field, because he's having to deal with all of this in the background, the amount of stress that guy was under. Trotting him out every week. People like Hideki Matsuyama, who turned down $400 million reportedly, who suddenly is playing through injury but stayed loyal to the tour anyway. Now he doesn't get to see that money, and it's kind of already happened.
Yeah, so that's obviously a problem. And listen, it's not like Jay Monahan and the PGA Tour didn't expect like some very negative feedback. But, from his perspective, and again, I don't know all the facts, I don't know the financials, and I don't know what the pending litigation would have unveiled. But what I do know is that, just big picture, you fight the good fight. And as time goes on, I'm not talking about Jay, or I call him Jay like he's my friend. I'm not talking about him. In general, you are trying to defend something. You are trying to uphold a principle, a golf tour, whatever it is, both. And you realize along the way that you might lose that fight. Not that you'll definitely lose that fight, but you might lose that fight. Or if you don't lose, if you win, you're still kind of a loser at the end of the day because of what the ultimate outcome is. If you kind of go through that process, you kind of have to evolve. And again, I'm speaking from a sort of a speculative standpoint, but we can't just assume that Jay Monahan was holding Rory up like you're saying, and that he was, saying those things a year ago or 2 years ago, whatever it was when LIV came around. We can't just assume that things didn't change. And if things change, then obviously, your mindset has to change too. So I agree with you. A lot of those players should have gripes. A lot of those players should call for Jay Monahan's resignation. I just don't know if it's warranted because we don't have the full picture, and some of those guys on the inside do.
Yeah, and super interesting. I mean, it looks like those conversations began 2 months ago, a meeting in London between Jay and the Public Investment Fund of Saudi Arabia, followed by rounds of golf, following by a meeting in Venice. I mean, if a meeting in Venice between Jay Monahan and LIV Golf sounds so Bond villain-esque, it's not even funny. You can see them riding in on their motorboats to sit in the cafe outside and have a discussion about what the future of the entire global world of golf is. I've put the letter up. This is what was sent out to the PGA Tour players today, and I want to dive into, I guess, a couple of things here that are really interesting for me from the letter that's been sent out. So, the establishment of a for-profit LLC. The PGA Tour will remain in place as a tax-exempt organization. Also interesting that the majority of the board is going to be held by the PGA Tour. So the Public Investment Fund are going to have a couple of guys on there. Obviously, they're going to have the chairman and Al Rumayyan, but the chief executive officer at this moment is Jay Monahan, pending what happens, I guess, with him and the PGA Tour players. And then LIV, obviously, formerly LIV, it seems that this new entity is going to be created. Maybe LIV won't even exist in its current format. I mean, in terms of some of the legal implications in here, casting your eyes over this letter, Sia, what do you see?
Yeah, it's interesting because we had a question from Chargy65 about tax exempt status and for profit. It's I haven't really carved out exactly how that's going to work. I mean, the PGA Tour, it looks like, and we see it here, they will remain 501c6, that's tax exempt, not profit or nonprofit status, but there will be a sort of a for-profit component. So I haven't really flushed out exactly what that means, but clearly they're trying to retain their nonprofit status, at least in large part. That's how I see it. And if they're, that's going to meet some scrutiny probably, because anytime you're getting this specific fund involved, it's probably going to be met with some scrutiny from those who declare you nonprofit or not. So we'll have to just wait and see how that goes, because you're right, like none of this has really gone through yet, but it's certainly been talked about with the attorneys on both sides, and they have, believe me, there will be no surprises for them. They have probably talked to the right people already. No guarantees obviously are in place, but they are ready to meet any sort of scenario, any sort of pushback, that's for sure.
I mean, and let's not forget either, like within all of this, the DP World Tour is also involved, and the DP World Tour has perhaps been more affected than the PGA Tour in terms of the players that have been able to move across, and that makes complete sense, right? Like the DP World Tour has for some time been losing players to the PGA Tour. Like I understand there's a lot of speculation on Twitter about it becoming a feeder tour, which I would reject given some of the importance in the national opens that appear on the DP World Tours and really prestigious tournaments on there as well. But in many ways, it has been fighting a battle with the PGA Tour in terms of losing a lot of these top class players like Fleetwood, like Hatton, like McIlroy and Rahm, obviously, who have gone across to the PGA Tour. And since LIV came in, they were again decimating other players such as Thomas Pieters, who is moving across, Adrian Otegi, who came across, played a few rounds there as well. So it's interesting for me how they're not going to fit into this piece. And reading through this letter, it mentions the creation of a new entity and the for-profit component. For me, the strongest concept that LIV has had has been the team concept. That's been the strongest component of their product, is the fact that it was doing something different, new, engaging, looking to create this franchise kind of model that we see in Formula One, that we see in the Indian Premier League for cricket, right? So within their first year of launch, the IPL, the second most watched cricket game on earth after the Cricket World Cup, was the Indian Premier League final. And since then, it's grown into this huge entity of franchise teams. They play, they bid on players, billions of dollars changing hands, and it really elevated the game without taking away from the rest of the tour. And for me, when they talk about creating this new profit entity, the way that I feasibly see this perhaps working is PGA Tour knew LIV was going to be a thorn in their side for many years. There's the legal implications, as you mentioned. They're not going to go through messy lawsuits for some decade or so, sitting in courtrooms trying to resolve this. They knew LIV was going to be a problem, regardless of the fact that I don't ever see it was going to take over the PGA Tour. And I think LIV knew that. I think LIV knew under the current state of play, they were not going to surpass the PGA Tour in terms of revenue or viewership or anything like that. So in terms of both of them coming together, for me, the way I see this perhaps working is PGA Tour keeps its schedule in many ways exactly the same as it stays now. DP World Tour keeps their schedule in many ways the same way that it stays now. And then this other entity is formed with Team Golf, and it draws on players from either DP World Tour PGA Tour, they come together, they play as teams for those rounds, and those teams get franchised, and that's the profit element of the LIV aspect.
I love that. I actually really like that idea. It's so funny. The team concept, it's so foreign to me. And the reason is because it's a foreign thing, literally. Like we don't like F1 for me. I mean, F1's kind of big now, but like F1's never been big for me. So the team concept, like it just doesn't resonate with me. I don't watch cricket, so it doesn't resonate with me. So I speak out of an abundance of ignorance that like I don't really like. I was going to say like I don't really like the team concept, but again, it's really just out of ignorance more than anything. But what I love about what you said is that retaining the PGA Tour schedule and just having the individual part component of it in large part, but then having that new entity kind of flash the team concept. So it's not necessarily interrupting what I'm accustomed to, what I like. I love that. I think that's, I mean, is that just, you're speculating, right? You're just kind of coming up with something.
I'm completely speculating with that, definitely, but it's something that I see as feasible and workable, because I don't see the LIV Tour continuing as this individual leaderboard sort of mixed in with team aspects, because that was not working. And the only reason they were kind of going down that route is because they weren't 2 years ago allowed in the room to speak with Jay and form this merger earlier. I mean, this was originally their concept. They moved away from it. The concept as it stood was not going to work and function. They knew that, but then PGA Tour on the other side also knew that this was going to be a massive pain in their ass for the next decade or so. So the merger, as I kind of see it, would be, you've got this team concept that runs independently. It doesn't interfere with like the major events. Like they're not going to schedule the team event opposite the Memorial. They're not going to schedule the team event opposite the Genesis at Riviera. Right. But instead, when the Palmetto Championship's on, that might be running as the kind of alternative tour event as it has been. Meanwhile, John Rahm and Team Nike is facing off against Rory McIlroy and Team TaylorMade, and they're drawing on players from both of the tours, whoever they can sign, and creating a kind of dynamic product that opposite the individual leaderboards I could see functioning. And in some ways, that sounds great. That sounds awesome. We get all of the best players at the key marquee tournaments that we want. We get a new exciting element in terms of the team golf. Sponsors going to be happy because that's extremely marketable, and I could see it growing from there.
Jay and everybody else that's in charge, he's at Deep Dive Golf. His name is David Bieleski. Don't say Bieleski because I've messed that up. David Bieleski. David, listen, I'm sure they've run through plenty of scenarios. They probably have a framework in place, but if that's not their framework, again, I'm speaking out of a bit of ignorance here, but I think it should be. Like I'm truly excited about that. What I thought you were going to say was that, something to the effect of like you're going to have like sort of team golf with the regular PGA Tour schedule, and it's going to be somehow incorporated into the individual format. Which honestly, maybe it's cool, but I'm just not super into. But the way you set it up, that's exciting. I mean, if we strip all of this stuff away, like all of the LIV versus this and all the other sort of issues, ethical issues that are born from this whole thing that started 2 years ago, just on a purely golf level. Forgive me for just talking about just the golf real quick. It's really exciting. What you just set out, David, which again is just your framework, is really exciting. To have a healthy Brooks Koepka back, Bryson DeChambeau back, like all of these guys, like all on the same sort of battlefield, I think is really cool. So I think once the dust settles, we'll all kind of appreciate the fact, even those that feel aggrieved right now, like that didn't get the message, they saw it on Twitter. Like I get all that. I would be mad too, but I don't know that there was another great way to do that, but I'd be mad too. I totally get that. But I think once the dust settles, I think everybody's going to end up being happy. Not like right away, but I'm talking long term. I think everybody's going to be happy.
Yeah, and I think that was one of their biggest fears was what they couldn't compete financially with what the public investment fund was able to bring for the long term. And conversely, the public investment fund wants to make a return on their investment. I mean, it is assets under management. They're not doing this as a donation. They're not doing this as a nice to have. They want to create something that is going to generate capital for them moving forward. And in terms of the franchise model, I mean, the PIF has been heavily involved in F1. They have invested heavily into that market. They know how that can work in terms of the team dynamic, along with a PGA schedule that hopefully is not actually that compromised, that we still get all these great tournaments that we love. We still get that individual element that we love to view. And then this is a nice add-on in terms of a team dynamic that can kind of work and resolve and tidy up a lot of these issues that both of them have. I saw a question here from Fires and wonder whether you want to speak to this, whether the PGA needs a players union, because I know that emerging from that players meeting, discussion was between the players whether they should unionize and where they go from here. What's your thoughts on that?
Ooh, that's a question I'm really not prepared to answer. It sounds really good in theory. Again, yeah, I'm not really sure. Yeah, I mean, you obviously, as an employee or a contractor, I mean, are they deemed employees now? I mean, obviously they've always been independent contractors.
Right, and I mean that's the other element, right? Of one of the beauties of PGA Tour has been that it is player run. It's supposed to be player run. It feels like this decision has been made by Jay Monahan, and that's it. So that's an interesting element, and we're still such early days that I have no idea how that's going to unfold. It's going to be really interesting to see how it does. But I believe now, being a profit entity, you do as they tell you. I mean, you're a business now. You are. You're not a not-for-profit. This isn't run by the players. It's run by this new entity, which the PIF is going to have a minority stake in. The PGA Tour is also going to have they're going to have the majority stake, and they're going to have the majority of the board. But if they call you and they say, we want you to play for Team Callaway, you best be playing for Team Callaway. I mean, that's how I read it.
Yeah, I think there'll probably be some push and pull there. Maybe there'll be some decision making on the players' part that is a little greater than that. But I don't know. That's the thing is this whole team concept. I never really watched LIV, so I didn't really get a chance to appreciate whether I would even like the team concept or not. So that whole thing is completely foreign to me.
I think this is the thing, right? LIV did not plan the product as it ended up. That was not their vision.
Right.
They were forced to adapt their product because they still wanted to have an influence on the world of golf, and the PGA Tour said no, so they adapted to try and make it work. I think there was a lot of things that were great. I think that the team concept, if you could get all of the best players and then franchise out those teams, I think there's potential there. I think that's their strongest idea. The individual leaderboard, some of the gimmicky stuff, I hope that they lose the range goats. Some of the corny stuff that came out of it, I think a lot of that's going to get trimmed back. I think you'll see, we've seen at the Ryder Cup, we've seen at the President's Cup, how dynamic and intriguing and engaging a team product can be, albeit that is country versus country. But within this new element, if you've got a favorite player and now they're playing alongside John Rahm and Tommy Fleetwood and those your guys, that's interesting in terms of that angle, and that's how I could see it perhaps developing.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Interesting question here from Ed as well. What happens to the contracts that the LIV golfers signed? Ed, your guess is as good as mine, because I mean, what happens to someone like Phil Mickelson's been paid $150 million for a multiple year contract? They're not going to ask him for his money back, but more intriguing is the other side for me of the guys who chose to turn down that money.
Yeah. First of all, I think LIV is probably going to have to honor their contracts, although I haven't actually looked at the contracts. So there could be an out provision. There could be some sort of global provision that, it could even be as specific as if leagues are to merge or something like that. Believe it or not, a attorney will throw some stuff in there that looks like boilerplate, but it's really kind of predictive more than anything. So I think, but not knowing anything, I think that those contracts are likely to be honored without knowing what's actually in the contracts. As far as the PGA guys, I mean, I kind of feel bad for them. Like we said that at the front end of the show. I don't know what you can do to try to make them whole other than just try to sell this concept and be like, hey, this is going to be great for you. But I don't know how you tell Hideki Matsuyama, for example, hey, sorry, you missed out on the 300, 400 mil. But that's just that I hate this phrase, but it kind of is what it is, right? I don't even know how you can. I heard somebody say that the LIV players would get penalized financially for reapplying. I mean, I just don't think that's going to be a thing. That sounds just kind of odd. So yeah, I just think everybody's going to be stuck where they're at.
And I'd say that's very unlikely as well. I can't see that they'll be penalised for coming back. They basically said, you're welcome to come back now as you wish. We may see, well, hopefully we see, people like Taylor Gooch next week who should be playing in the US Open, who was originally qualified for the US Open. He should be coming back and playing that event straight away. But yeah, in terms of, I interviewed Ryan Fox last week. Ryan Fox, so I talked to him about turning down that LIV deal and how he was so comfortable with that decision, knowing that next year he was going to qualify for the Masters, he was going to qualify for Bay Hill. He was so excited playing these tournaments that it was a great amount of money to have, but he decided to turn it down to pursue some of these goals in lieu of payment. And now it kind of turns out you probably could have done both. Interesting from Stephen here that we brought up, they'll only be paid for 2023 and now today they'll lose the balance after this year. Well, yeah. Look, I mean, that's interesting. I guess they're going to make a lot more money in this new entity anyway, however it is framed. Sia, any last comments? Because straight after this, the reason why we're doing this chat is we've got the PGA Draftcast there's a golf tournament this week at the IBC Canadian Open, believe that or not. There are still DFS going on. There's still teams playing. We're going to give you the best advice of how to play and tackle those tournaments. So the idea was have this chat, get a lot of these big curly questions out of the way so you guys can focus on the draft. So before we head to the PGA Draftcast, any last comments from you?
Well, you were right to bring up the fact that there's going to be like plenty more to come, whether it's litigation wise, with the DOJ and just approving all of this from an antitrust standpoint, like all that needs to sort of fall into place, which I think it probably will. This is going to be kind of a back and forth for quite some time, but I do think ultimately it'll be resolved the way that LIV and the PGA Tour have intended today. And I think we should be looking forward to some even better golf than what we've been seeing the last couple of years. So just on a pure golf level, I'm pretty, and I say that from just a viewing and gambling and DFS standpoint, right? Because we're about to do the PGA Draftcast. Like, I'm excited about what this is going to bring.
Yeah, and it's great having all the players back. I mean, at the end of the day, the best outcome we could ever hope for was that LIV went away in some way. LIV has gone away, maybe not in the way that we expected, but we do get all those players back. But also, Sia, wrong, because the correct answer was sports.
Come join